Cover story this evening, the India-China relationship. It has mostly been tumultuous. At best, they're frenemies, friends who are rivals, whose words or actions can bring you down. So when one of them proposes a party with a third friend, tilting the balance decidedly in its own favor, how do you respond? It is complicated. China wants talks and it wants to bring Pakistan in tow. A trilateral summit. India, China, Pakistan trilateral. Chew on it. Let me give you some background. China continues to oppose India's bid for membership to the Nuclear Suppliers Group, the NSG. China continues to shield Islamabad's terror infrastructure on global platforms. And China came this close to fighting a full-scale war with India this time last year over a border dispute, Doklam. It tested the two neighbors. Tension was at an all-time high. Back-channel talks led to a meeting, an informal summit in Wuhan, a thaw. India and China are now mending ties and looking for ways to strengthen them. Today, the Chinese envoy proposed a game-changing idea. Ambassador Lao Zhaohui he made a pitch for a trilateral summit between India, China and Pakistan to settle differences between the two countries, India and Pakistan. Ambassador Lui outlined a comprehensive framework for the future. He said that India and China should follow 5 C's to improve their relationship: communication, cooperation, contacts, coordination and control. 5 C's. Let's take them one by one. He called for more strategic communication, meetings and heart-to-heart dialogues to improve exchanges. He said that the Indian Prime Minister and Chinese President share a personal friendship and both sides should make an attempt to transmit these sentiments down to the people. The ambassador said that India and China have broad converging interests. They face common challenges in Asia and beyond, and both sides should work together. These comments come exactly a year after Doklam, the border standoff between Indian and Chinese soldiers. So far, so good. What came next, though, has set the cat among the pigeons. The Mandarin called for a trilateral summit between India, China and Pakistan. He said that leaders from these 3 countries should consider meeting on the sidelines of the SCO summit. Hear it for yourself.
Some Indian friends suggested that China, India and Pakistan may have some kind of trilateral cooperation on the framework of SCO. I think this is a very constructive idea. This time, in Qingdao, on 7th of SCO summit, China, Russia, and Mongolia, the leaders from 3 countries, hold the trilateral summit on 7th. So why not China, Pakistan, China, India together hold another trilateral summit?
On the face of it, it seems like an attempt at outreach. But there's more to it than meets the eye. Read between the lines and you would realize that China is making a pitch to play the role of a mediator, resolving differences between India and Pakistan. Beijing wants to play big brother. The idea has been in the air for a while now. Last month, Chinese state mouthpiece The Global Times ran an article. It said that due to China's massive investments in the neighborhood for the Belt and Road Initiative, China now has a vested interest in resolving disputes between India and Pakistan, especially in the context of Jammu and Kashmir. Elsewhere, China has flashed its checkbook, flexed its muscle and coerced smaller players to play ball. It hasn't worked with India. Delhi has categorically refused to join the Belt and Road Initiative. China needs the Indian market, so it's trying this new trick of a trilateral meeting. Should India consider it? Absolutely not. Because Beijing cannot be an honest broker. Consider these facts. China is not a neutral party by any means in this equation. It is pumping, or it has been pumping, up to $50 billion into Pakistan through CPEC. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It's a project that India has vocally opposed on international forums because it disrespects India's territorial integrity. It goes through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. China is the main supplier of arms and ammunition to Pakistan's defense forces. India is the main strategic rival of China in South Asia, and by keeping Pakistan on its side, Beijing has often needled India on issues of sanctions against terrorists like Masood Azhar and Hafiz Saeed. But in these uncertain times, China needs access to India's markets, especially after US President Donald Trump imposed aggressive tariffs on Chinese imports. The renaming of the Asia-Pacific as Indo-Pacific has added to Beijing's insecurities. It wants access to India, it wants partnership with India, and it's ready to play the Pakistan card for that. Meanwhile, China is busy working on smaller nations in the neighborhood, indebting them to the point where they become Chinese colonies, completely dependent on Beijing for the survival. Case in point, Nepal. On Tuesday, Nepal's Prime Minister, Mr. K.P. Oli, flies to Beijing on his first visit since assuming office in February this year. On the agenda are a raft of development projects that he hopes China will deliver on and which he hopes will enable him to balance the current heavy dependence on India. Perhaps the most ambitious is a rail link from Shigatse in Tibet to Girong on the Nepal border, and from there to the capital Kathmandu. That's a distance of 724 kilometers. China wants this line to extend all the way to Birganj on the Indian border. It is proposed that another branch of this line extend to Burang on the border with northwest Nepal. This is close to Kalapani on India's border with Nepal, which is disputed between the two countries. Nepal claims Kalapani as its own territory. The railway line is part of China's systematic efforts to question and undermine India's claim to dominance over its neighborhood. China hopes to use the rail link as part of its Belt and Road program to reach the Indian market and sell its goods there. Beijing has already proposed an economic corridor bringing together China, Nepal and India. It's an idea which has some votaries in Kathmandu but has no takers whatsoever in India, obviously because China is the world's manufacturing hub and will swamp the Indian market with its goods. India is trying to counter China with its own plan for rail and road connectivity, but its ability to plan and execute projects on time is a source of major irritation to Kathmandu. Add to that, Oli also wants China to help develop his country's hydroelectric potential. Until now, this has been largely an Indian preserve. Oli wants Chinese investment in setting up a network of gas pipelines. He's keen on importing petroleum products from China to reduce dependence on India. Cost is a major hurdle as petroleum products will have to come from China. Indian supply depots are across the border. The larger issue is the cost involved in laying a rail link in the mountains of Tibet. Globally, there is no history of freight movement at such altitudes. There will be environmental challenges. The main issue is viability. Trains carrying goods may be full while entering Nepal, but are likely to return empty given low volumes of trade between China and Nepal, which is why it is crucial for China to get entry into the Indian market by hook, by crook, or economic muscle, and that's what it's trying to do. Bottom line, the world woke up to the news of an earthquake in Japan this morning, with 3 people reported to have been killed. The quake is believed to be relatively weak, but it's shaken the country nonetheless. Here's why.
Yet another earthquake in Japan. This time the magnitude was 6.1 on the Richter scale. Tremors hitting Osaka, Japan's second biggest metropolis, early on Monday morning. 3 people have been killed and over 300 injured. Buildings swaying, cracked roads and burst water pipes were a common sight all around. The quake struck around 8 a.m. local time. Usually the traffic is at its peak at that time. Osaka is home to around 2 million people, and clearly the jolt's impact was palpable. The quake knocked over walls, broke windows and set off scattered building fires. A 9-year-old girl is among the 3 dead. The earthquake caused power failures across the region, forcing hospitals to be evacuated. Factory operations were halted and the famous bullet trains came to a grinding halt. Anxious and worried commuters were left stranded. Many chose to sit down on the floor. Amid the gloom, the good news was that no tsunami warnings were issued. Bureau Report, WION.
So to live like a king, they say, is everyone's dream, but with changing times, the fortunes of different royal families have also fluctuated. The Thai king may have become rich overnight, but let's take a look at the richest and the poorest in royalty from across the world.
The wealth of kings is a matter of envy. In the majority of cases, it is also a guarded secret. However, depending on whether the royals have been reduced to titular heads or still call the shots in their country, their fortunes have grown or ebbed in recent times. In the year 2018, the wealthiest royals on the block are the Saudis. According to some estimates, the Saudi royal family is believed to be worth a jaw-dropping $1.7 trillion. Technically, all the wealth in the Saudi kingdom belongs to the royal family and is divided among 15,000 royals. But it is the king and his close coterie who control much of the wealth. Picture this. Immediately after his elevation as the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman made an off-the-cuff purchase of a 440-feet yacht worth $550 million. The prince is also believed to have purchased a Leonardo da Vinci painting for a whopping $450 million at an auction. Besides the many palaces he already owns, bin Salman has also shelled out over $300 million for a chateau outside Paris, which has been designed on the lines of the Palace of Versailles. On the other hand, the British Queen is estimated to be worth over $900 million. Many have dubbed her to be estate rich but cash poor. A glance at the palaces and castles would put this in perspective. The British royal family owns Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, which is the royal family's official country residence. The Palace of Westminster, the meeting place for the House of Commons and the House of Lords, are officially owned by the Queen. Besides this, the British royal family owns a whole host of other estates throughout the country, such as Hillsborough Castle, the Palace of Holyrood House, to name just a few. As per some other estimates, the British Queen also owns other tangible assets like the crown jewels, the royal collection of art, etc., which are estimated to be worth a whopping $25.5 billion. But it is hard to estimate their real value, as most of these are historical artifacts, which the royal family acquired as a part of Britain's imperial expansion. But not all kings and queens have tremendous wealth to boast of. The Japanese king of the chrysanthemum throne, 83-year-old King Akihito, who will abdicate by the end of this year, is believed to be worth a paltry $40 million. Despite hailing from a dynasty which has ruled Japan for over 2,000 years, the assets owned by the Japanese emperor are relatively modest in comparison. With a personal staff of over 30 people, along with a live orchestra and 4 doctors who are always on call, the Japanese emperor presently owns the 2 imperial palaces at Tokyo and Kyoto. Emperor Akihito also owns a 622-acre farm, which generates an income of about $3 million. It is also widely speculated that the emperor draws an annual salary from public taxes, which hasn't so far been disclosed. In the case of India, a huge number of royal families lord over their estates, albeit in a titular manner. One of the richest among them is the Maharaja of Mysuru from the Wodeyar dynasty. The Wodeyars own the Amba Villas, or the Mysuru Palace, which is one of the biggest draws for tourists in India. The wealth of the present titular monarch of Mysuru is a matter of speculation, but his father, Shrikantadatta Narasimharaja Wodeyar, in 2004, had declared assets of over 1,500 crore. Besides the Mysuru Palace, the Wodeyars also own the Bengaluru Palace as well. Bureau Report, WION.
The Indian government is planning to make it compulsory for tech titans like Google and Facebook to store data of Indian users locally. How does it help you, the user, is the question. Experts say that India still lacks strict data protection laws and has a lot of catching up to do.
India is the second largest internet market in the world. The country has over 460 million internet users. In fact, the number is expected to go up to 635.8 million by 2021. But sadly, the country with such a huge number of internet users doesn't have clear and strict laws to protect people against hacking and data breaches. And this, in turn, is leaving users vulnerable and prone to hacking. Well, the only question to ask here is what is stopping India from designing a safe environment for internet users? And all of that comes down to only one thing: the absence of strict legal framework, and there are a few things to note. We don't have a legal framework to govern how the data should be collected, processed and stored. Companies are not legally bound to report data breaches. For instance, in contrast to companies in the European Union, which has stringent data protection standards, companies in India are not expected to disclose data breaches to clients. We don't have a full menu data protection law that can guarantee a safe environment for internet users in India. While a body has been set up to draft a data protection bill, it remains unknown as to when the laws will be enforced. Currently, the strongest law that we have is the years-old Information Technology Act 2000, but it's vague and also its enforcement is questionable. Clearly, India is not upping its game. It's not getting aggressive in improving the defense mechanism. And users like you and me are paying the cost in terms of our personal and sensitive details. Bureau Report, WION.
The celebrated Mount Everest, the world's highest mountain, has also become its highest rubbish dump. Raw sewage is also causing concern to environmentalists, with temperatures rising, more ice is melting off the mountain slopes, and this is revealing an even more distressing state of affairs with waste dating back several decades.
On what should be one of the world's most spectacular views, an increasing number of big-spending climbers are paying little attention to the ugly footprint they leave behind. Fluorescent tents, discarded climbing equipment, empty gas canisters and even human excrement litter the route to the summit of the 29,000-foot peak. No less than 600 climbers have already made their way up the slope in the first half of this year. 5 years ago, Nepal implemented a $4,000 rubbish deposit per team climbing up Everest. The amount would be refunded if each climber brought down at least 8 kilograms of waste. In Tibet, climbers are also fined $100 per kilogram if they don't bring back their trash. However, the problem is that many climbers opt to forfeit the deposit. Compared to the trek, which costs between $20,000 to $100,000, it's but a minor expense. Experienced mountaineers also say some officials accept small bribes to turn a blind eye. Meanwhile, melting glaciers are exposing trash that has accumulated on the mountain since Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay made the first successful summit 65 years ago. Environmentalists are also concerned that raw sewage on Everest could be affecting water sources down in the valley. For now, the only solutions offered have been to create a dedicated garbage team and biogas plant for the sewage. But a greater care for this majestic peak and greater respect for nature by Everest climbers wouldn't go amiss. Bureau Report, WION.
What's in a name, you may ask? Well, 2 countries in the Balkans have settled a naming dispute after nearly 3 decades. Hardliners in both countries are out on the streets calling the deal a sellout. So what is this deal and why is it so controversial?
It was a night unlike any other in Skopje. Flash grenades lit up the night outside the parliament as hundreds of people clashed with the police. Tear gas filled the street as protests raged over the deal to rename Macedonia as the Republic of North Macedonia. Demonstrators took on the police and pelted them with rocks and bottles. The scene was similar at the Greece-Macedonia border. The Green Hills were covered in smoke as riot police clashed with flag-waving Greek protesters. There were bottles, stones and tear gas outside the Greek parliament as well. Hundreds of people filled the street shouting slogans against the government and calling for the resignation of the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister survived a no-confidence motion and the deal went ahead. History was made in the small Greek village of Sarades on Sunday as the 2 Balkan countries signed the pact to change the name of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia to the Republic of North Macedonia. A 27-year-old dispute was being settled. Or so it seemed.
Κάνουμε ένα ιστορικό βήμα για να υπάρχουν από εδώ και στο εξής μόνο νικητές. Για να επουλώσουμε τις πληγές του χρόνου, να ανοίξουμε το δρόμο της ειρήνης, της συναδέλφωσης, της συνεργασίας, της συνανάπτυξης. Όχι μόνο για τις χώρες μας, αλλά και για όλα τα Βαλκάνια, για όλη την Ευρώπη. Αν η ψυχή κάθε λαού είναι η ιστορία του, τότε στη συμφωνία μας καθρεφτίζονται οι ψυχές και των δύο λαών.
Both Tsipras as well as his Macedonian counterpart Zoran Zaev were present at the signing ceremony, along with the United Nations and the European Union officials. The deal gave something to both sides. Athens keeps the name Macedonia, which it claims for its own ancient province. Remember, the most famous of all Greeks, Alexander the Great, came from Macedonia. The name dispute began after Macedonia gained independence from Yugoslavia in 1991. The country got recognized as the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. But it remained isolated and could neither gain membership of NATO nor the European Union as Greece objected. The deal makes it clear now that Greece will lift all objections and Macedonia will get to bid for NATO and the European Union membership. The agreement has to be ratified by parliaments in both countries. What's more, Macedonia will now have a referendum in which voters will have a say. So politics and protests are heating up. While the opposition in Greece argues that Macedonia has plans to expand into its territory, in Macedonia, Prime Minister Zoran Zaev is being accused of making too many concessions.
I don't think we should be afraid of terrorism. Our strong faith as Muslims will tell us what Islam really is. That's how we will show Islam in the right light.
Thus, even after the smiles and handshakes at the border, not everyone is convinced that this is a lasting solution to the problem. For now, hardliners in both countries are smelling an opportunity to make the most of it. Bureau Report, WION.
Ahead of World Refugee Day on the 20th of June, the global spotlight has centered on the plight of the Rohingya refugees, considered one of the biggest refugee crises in the world. More than 700,000 Rohingyas have been displaced after a military crackdown in Myanmar's northwestern Rakhine state. Most of them are now in Bangladesh, living in the border town of Cox's Bazar. Their return home is nothing but a struggle.
In 2015, Rohingya insurgents attacked police posts and an army camp in western Myanmar's Rakhine state, killing about 12 people. Myanmar security forces and Rakhine Buddhist vigilantes responded. What happened next is described by many as a campaign of violence and arson aimed at driving out the Muslim population. As a result, hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims flooded into Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar as the violence in Rakhine state continued. The country's leader and Nobel Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi admitted to the huge task at hand and vowed to restore peace in her country.
We condemn all human rights violations and unlawful violence. We are committed to the restoration of peace, stability, and rule of law throughout the state.
International media and observers argued there was little evidence of anything but ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya continuing in the country. Human rights groups called for an arms embargo and other sanctions on Myanmar. In 2017, Bangladeshi NGOs called on UN aid agencies to increase their support. At this stage, the United Nations had appealed for $434 million to aid 1.2 million Rohingya refugees.
Have little or nothing to go back to. Their homes and villages have been destroyed. There are deep divisions between communities that remain unaddressed, and humanitarian access is inadequate.
In January 2018, Bangladesh and Myanmar agreed to complete the voluntary repatriation of all the Rohingya refugees over 2 years. But the Myanmar government was seen to raze villages in the Rakhine state. Myanmar set up reception centres near the border in Rakhine. A mere 5 families returned to Rakhine state in April, but the UN said the conditions for their return was not safe, dignified or sustainable. Bureau Report, WION.